So today we're going to take a closer look at the Prism management interface into our Lenovo Converged HX Series Nutanix appliance. To start off with, we're going to take a look at the home page. So as I log into the Prism management environment, and I'm presented with a snapshot of my current status of the cluster. And on most of these overview pages, I look at it kind of dividing into three sections. On the left-hand side here, in this column, we kind of have a summary of the configuration. So we can see here that we're running ESX as our hypervisor, and it tells us what level we're at. It gives me a snapshot of my storage capacity, how much is free. It gives me some understanding of the current virtual machine count that's running, or if I've got some off or suspended in the environment. And then again at the bottom, a hardware summary. You can see I've got 3 hosts making up my cluster here, utilizing the HX 3500 model. So that's kind of the first column. The second column gives me a snapshot of some key performance indicators. So we can see we're looking at some I/O statistics here on the top, and then we've got a snapshot of our CPU utilization and memory utilization. And then over on the right-hand side, I've got information about the health of the cluster. If I've got any critical events, you can see here, even at the top level, and we'll see this in more detail in a few moments, I've got a power supply problem here that's being indicated. I've got a storage container that's beginning to reach its maximum. So we'll see more about that. But in general on the health, I can always also click in this window. This is going to take me to a nice summary picture of the health of my environment. And one of the key things about this environment is that I do have a number of cluster checks that you can see listed here on the right-hand side. And I'll just kind of scroll down to give you a feel for the long list of things that are being checked on a regular basis throughout the health of the cluster. And these things are all reported through this interface, so that if not even that I have a problem, but if I begin to have a problem, right? If there's a performance issue that's beginning to develop, right, I'm going to see that here at that top level, and it's going to be reported through that constant cluster check, which is happening in the background. So that's kind of that home screen, right? Again, gives me that high-level view, configuration, performance, and health of the system. And from there, I can dig into more detail. And to do that, I'm going to kind of start at the bottom and work my way up. So I'm going to start with the hardware view. So I'm going to select hardware here. And again, we're first presented now within the hardware area with an overview. And again, you see kind of those three pieces, 3 sections here. The first column, again, talking about the configuration, now focused into the hardware. I have 3 HX 3500 systems as part of my cluster. It gives me an idea of the disks that I have across those 3 systems, hard drives as well as solid state drives, and again, some CPU and memory capacity. Second column here, more about, again, performance within this environment, and over on the right, a little bit more now about the health and the events specifically related to my hardware. And again, we see that power supply error reflected here. To dig in a little bit deeper, I kind of like the diagram view from here. So I'm going to select that, and this is nice because now this gives me a nice graphical representation of the systems that we're working on. So once again, we can see my cluster now consisting of the 3 HX 3500 systems. We can see the middle one here. We've got the power supply error that we've had just simply unplugged the power supply. So when I mouse over that, we see the pop-up event indicating such. And if I want to select this system to get a little bit more detail now in this one box, I simply select it here. And we can see that the lower half of the screen now is shifted to a more detailed view for this particular node in my cluster. And down the left-hand side here, we're going to see a lot of detail about that particular node: host name, IP addresses, the address of the integrated management module. So, for example, if I needed to dig into this node specifically, log into a remote console, firmware updates, and those kinds of things, I can log into the IMM right from that link. So again, more detail then about the specific system here. I can also do some things if I needed, for example, to turn on the blue indicator light. This particular system, since it has a power supply error, you already have the yellow light certainly indicating that as part of the light path. But if I needed to locate a system, maybe one of the other systems in the cluster, wanted to flash the blue light on it so that the person going out and touching the system in the data center knew which system they were looking at, it's simple enough to simply turn on the LED and turn it off right from here. In the center here, you're also getting more information about how this particular box is performing. So CPU, memory, disk I/O, and if I scroll down here a little bit, you'll see a number of other things that we're tracking here, latency and such, so you can get a feel for performance at the individual system. If I click on the host usage tab, you see a little bit more detail on the utilization at the disk level between the solid state and the spinning drives. And again, this is something that it's not something that you have to manage, right? One of the nice value propositions of this solution is that it is automatically managing and moving data. Hot data resides on the solid state drives, and the colder data is migrated off to the spinning drives. But it's kind of interesting, and we'll come back to this a couple of times here. It's kind of interesting to actually see the effect of that here within Prism, and so we'll kind of highlight that in a couple of places. But again, I want to emphasize it's not something that I've got to worry about as an administrator or manage to it, because the software is going to really take care of that for me. That's one of the really nice things about this. Speaking of drives, I do have the 8 drives in this particular configuration identified here. If I click on these drives, that first drive, for example, is one of my solid state drives. For example, we can see here that on the solid state drives, we're getting a fair amount of IOs per second here. The demo workload we have running in the background is accessing these drives. Both solid state drives getting very similar workload. But again, it's interesting to see as I flick over into the spinning drives, right, where the cold data is stored. You see, in fact, in this case, practically no I/O activity. So it is as you would expect, right? The workload that's active is being routed into the solid state drives and being serviced there at a very high performance response time. And then the data that's being held on the spinning drives is colder data, not accessed as much by the workloads. So again, it's kind of interesting to see that as you look through the interface. So that's kind of a dive into the hardware. Let's move up one level. We're talking about drives, so let's move up to that next level up, which really looks at the storage now. And we're going to look at the storage kind of across the cluster. And once again, the first overview we see kind of has those 3 sections on the left here. Tells me a little bit more about my configuration, the drives that we have available, the containers that we have. So in this environment, you think about it as one big pool of storage, but we then subdivide that pool into containers that I can then make available to different workloads, and we'll talk about that more in a few moments. But it gives me a summary here of the containers that are available, and then down here at the bottom, the capacity optimization. And we'll see this in a little more detail in a moment. But it's good to know that if I turn on some of the extra features to be able to do compression, for example, in this case, I've got a little over 6 terabytes of raw data being compressed down to 4 terabytes of space, and it gives me an indication of which of the different deduper compression or erasure coding is providing that advantage. And so you can kind of see a little bit of that there as well. So again, configuration on the first column, performance here in the middle column, and then any events or health indicators here on the right-hand side. And here again, it's highlighted that, hey, one of my containers is starting to run out of space. So let's get into a little more detail here, and I'm going to go to the table view in this case. And so this lists for me the containers that we have, and you'll see immediately this one highlighted, again reflecting that earlier error message. This particular container is approaching capacity, 79%. And we can see kind of side by side here, again, one of the values of having these different containers, right? Two basic things to think about. One is, first of all, I've got a very large storage pool, and I don't want to make all of that data space available to each of my different applications, right? I want to perhaps in some cases say, well, this particular application, they only get to see 1 terabyte or 2 terabytes. So that's one reason to have a container, so we don't immediately expose the whole capacity to each individual application. But another good reason for it is that you can have different characteristics of the container. So for example, this file server 2, you can see that we've got the compression turned on in this case. And as we scroll over here a little bit, you can see the impact of that, which is these 2 containers happen to have pretty much the same data being stored on them. When compression is off, it's taking almost 1 terabyte, and when compression is turned on, it's down to 137 gigabytes. So in our demo environment, you're getting a lot of value out of that compression. that may not be, mileage will vary depending on the application, but certainly you can see some of that ability here and some of that impact. When I select an individual container, again, down the bottom here, we're going to see a little bit more information, again, getting into the detail we were looking at before about the use of the solid state drives versus the spinning drives. And again, this kind of reflects what you would expect. On the file server data, this is very cold data. We can see at the top here, if I just kind of mouse back up here, you'll see that the IOPS here are practically nothing. So this is all very cold data, and therefore you can see that with the yellow indicator in the pie chart, all that data, almost all that data, has been migrated off to spinning drives. If I go down to the bottom here and select this container, this is where my active workloads are all running. And again, you can see in this case I've got a fair amount of IOs being required there. And the usage from a drive point of view is the opposite. So the vast majority of my data there is hot and being serviced off of the solid state drive. So again, not something you have to manage day to day, but interesting to see that reflected here in the interface. So that's a little bit of the view on some of the performance things that you can see inside of this. I think one of the key benefits here, one of the things I want to really make sure we emphasize here is outside of all of the performance and analysis you can see, right, this whole solution is about saving time and effort. And so let's take a moment and look at an example of that. Let's say I've got a new application coming online, and to support that application, I need to create a new container. And I've got plenty of space available in my storage pool, but I've got a new application coming online, and I need to be able to identify a subset of that overall pool that I'm going to make available for this particular application. And let's say they need about 1 terabyte of data. So I need to get them available storage. Now, in a traditional environment, how am I going to do that? Well, if I'm the server administrator, I'm in a larger shop, the first thing I probably have to do is go find the storage administrator. And I have to take some time to track that person down, get into their queue, set up a meeting or whatever, right? So there's some kind of organizational overhead in that process. Even if I'm the storage administrator, right, just to do the work, right, I now have to go off into my storage infrastructure. I have to identify some free space someplace, identify some disks. I have to create a volume of some kind, identify a handful of disks, decide what kind of RAID I want, what kind of stripe size, do all that work, create the volume, right, and then typically take that volume, and I still have to map it to a LUN of some kind and get that LUN mapped into my individual server. So we're talking about hours of work, at least if it's me that can do it all myself, and if it's multi-person's process throughout my organization, it could be days of work, right? And in some cases we hear from customers it could be a week's worth to get through the approvals and the process around getting this new storage allocated for an application. So lots of words. Let's look at what this involves here from this interface. If I have to create a new container for this application, I come up here to the button, I say add container. I'm going to give it a name here. We're just going to call it something really creative like new storage. And I want to notice it reflects the maximum capacity within the storage pool. I'm going to narrow down how much I'm actually communicating or exposing for my application. And I also want to mount it to my ESXi hosts automatically because that's where the workloads are going to be, right? I don't want to have to do that as a separate step. I have some choices in here about setting the replication factor. Replication factor 2 is fine in this case. Here's where I'm going to set my advertised capacity. I said I wanted about 1 terabyte, so I'm going to enter that in. And then I've got some options in here for different types of compression and deduplication. Let's just select standard compression for this particular environment. And I'm going to select save. And that's it. Right, you can see right up here at the top, kind of a couple of pop-ups here. New storage has been created, mounted successfully as data stores to my 3 hosts. And in fact, we can verify that. Let's pop over to the vCenter console. Right, when I'm running ESX, the advantage for ESX for VMware folks is that you can continue to manage your virtual machines from the vCenter environment that you already know and understand. And so we're going to bounce over there to see our virtual infrastructure here. And we've selected one of the servers, and we're looking at the data stores that are currently available, or I should say were available a few moments ago. You can see the ones that were listed before I created my new one. I'm just going to hit the refresh button here. And VMware is going to go out and refresh, and we'll see now that that new storage object is here. It's available. It's mounted to my VMware servers, and I'm pretty much ready to go. So literally within, what was that, 20 seconds? All right, I was able to create a new storage container, make it available for a new application, and they're off and ready to go. And again, literally hours, if not days, of activity that might have to happen otherwise. And I think that is a great snapshot of the value proposition, one of the key value propositions for this whole solution, and in this case, particularly pertaining to the storage. But we'll see. I'll talk about some other areas of this as well. Okay, so in getting back to our kind of process of starting at the bottom and building up, we looked at the hardware, we looked at the storage here. We started to talk about VMs, so let's go up to the virtual machine layer here. And once again, in this case, because I'm running ESX, I'm doing a lot of my virtual machine management from vCenter, where I've done it before, where I would expect it to be. If I'm going to the Acropolis hypervisor, then some of that work is actually going to be able to be better integrated into this interface, and I can do more of my create virtual machines and such from there. But in this demo, I'm running ESX, so my day-to-day create virtual machine, DRS setup and stuff like that is going to be handled by vCenter, but there's still value to be able to see the virtual machines reflected within the Prism interface as well. And so once again, here at the overview, we see a summary of the configuration, the level of ESXi I'm at, how many virtual machines I have, how many virtual CPUs are provisioned, reserved capacity, memory, same thing, a little bit of performance here in the middle, and again, if I have any events over here on the right-hand side. If I go to the table view, I can get that whole view of all of my virtual machines. If I have issues, we're going to see things highlighted in here. For example, here we've got one that's in yellow because it's suspended. So if I didn't expect that, right, I could certainly see that right away. I can get a good feel for who's using the most CPU, for example. Simply sort that column by CPU usage, and I can identify which virtual machines are consuming a lot of CPUs or I/O bandwidth or whatever I want to look at here. And again, that's similar information that I can get from within vCenter, but it's kind of handy to have it within here. If I wanted to just narrow things down, for example, to one of the physical servers, wanted to see all the virtual machines running on one physical server, I could filter that down, all right, so we can see that. And again, we're getting some information down here about performance usage, for example. And again, these are some of that performance information. I could get that from vCenter. One of the nice things I think about having it here, let's say I was interested in, let's select one of these virtual machines, for example, and I'm looking at now that virtual machine performance down here at the bottom. Let's look at memory usage, for example. And you can see as I mouse over, this says Add Chart to Analysis page. So I'm going to select that, and what that's going to do is bring in that particular virtual machine utilization here in my analysis page. And what I like about this is the ability to now put that in context with other things that are happening in my cluster. So the value of having that virtual machine information here in the Prism interface is I'm not just looking at the virtual machine utilization, but now I can look at other things that are happening within my cluster. For example, here I've got cluster disk I/O, cluster memory. Here's the specific virtual machine memory utilization I have. And I've got this slider here that I can move back and forth to kind of line things up. If I see a particular event that's happening and I want to know what the impact of that event was, across the rest of the environment, I can kind of line that up and see what that particular event was, and then see the performance impact to it. So the ability to add the virtual machine performance analysis in with the overall analysis of the environment can be kind of important. And again, here you can scale this out. I can look at a day's worth of information if I want to see things happening. In that regard, I can scale it up into kind of multiple days at a time, and we can see different performance things happening. In that regard. And again, you can see different events that are highlighted here. And if I wanted to see what the impact was, I could scroll over and do that. So again, I think that's really a key thing here is the ability to add that into the overall context from an analysis point of view. Another thing I wanted to highlight here is also the data protection view. Now, in this case, I don't have any of the data protection features turned on in this particular demonstration, so this This particular screen is going to be really boring, lots of zeros and empty boxes. But assuming I did have some of the asynchronous disaster recovery or metro availability features turned on, I would be able to see that very clearly here from this overview and again dig into more detail here. So it is part of the interface. I don't have a very good demonstration for you, but I just wanted to highlight that if you're turning on those features, again, one place to go to find that information. Then a couple other things I just wanted to make the point, and getting back again into the idea of saving time, right? A couple of other good examples of that I think are really key here. One is the ability to upgrade my environment. And again, think about the time that it takes to manually go through a cluster and move workloads around and put systems into maintenance mode if I have to update various aspects of that particular system. Here with this solution, I simply select Upgrade Software. You can see it identifies my current version. It's going to give me a bit of an error message there simply because this system is not currently online to the internet. But I do have new software updated or uploaded to the system, so it doesn't have to check. Right, I can kind of side load it, if you will, and it's available here, and I can simply go through and upgrade from here. And again, it's a few clicks, and it's going to automatically go through. And in this case, I'm selecting the Acropolis software, so it's going to upgrade the software in each of these different environments transparently to the workload. Right, it's going to get that done without actually having to take any of the workload offline. So I could do Acropolis, I could upgrade the hypervisor itself, I could upgrade some of the firmware, I could upgrade the cluster check software, right? All of those things are available here in the update software, and it's gonna automate that upgrade process for me to a great extent and make it a lot easier and a lot less impact into my overall environment. And in the same way, I also wanted to just to talk a little bit about expand cluster. We'll come back to this in a more detailed video here in the future. But the process of expanding my cluster, right? I'm running out of capacity, and I need to add more storage, more compute, more memory, whatever may be the key thing. Typically, all three of those things is what I'm beginning to run out of as I add more and more workload. What does it take to expand a cluster, to install a new piece of hardware and a new software stack in the traditional way, right? A lot of extra work, a lot of installation. In this case, right, it comes through and I say I want to expand my cluster. I have a server that's been delivered from the factory. I've racked it. I've plugged it in. The system automatically finds it for me. Right, I can select it. Simply add in. And again, we won't go through all the detail here, but add in the IP address. A couple other things. Hit the go button, and it's going to go through the process of now adding that node into my cluster. And with very little user intervention, it may take a little time to kind of work through the process depending on what I'm asking for, but it's not user intensive, it's not administrator intensive. It comes back and now I'm going to have a larger cluster and be able to add new workload as I need into the environment. So that's kind of a quick overview of the Prism management software. For our Converged HX Series Nutanix appliance. Hopefully that gives you a good feel for some of the capabilities. And we'll come back and get into more detail on some of those specific areas, but I think you can see some of the key value in terms of understanding my cluster, my configuration, understanding the performance, and most importantly, saving time for administrators by automating some very key tasks and allowing them to perform those tasks in a much smaller window. All right, thanks very much. We'll talk to you later.